What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. We have Amir Khan, 34 wins and 5 losses, taking on Kell Brook, 39 wins and 3 losses. Now, I had recently done a video and I was saying that I was kind of leaning Kell Brook via stoppage. I talked a little bit about both of their backgrounds, some of Amir Khan's spectacular performances against Devin Alexander, and that was later on. That was up at 147, and before that against Andres Kotelnik, Paulie Malignaggi, Zab Judah. Amir Khan is about as talented as it gets when it comes to throwing the hands. The Achilles heel has been not anytime, but there have been a couple of cases where he got caught cleanly early in his career versus Breidis Prescott, mid-prime career versus Danny Garcia, and then later on, late in his career versus Canelo Alvarez, getting knocked out or TKO stopped in the case of Danny Garcia. And as talented as he's been, and, you know, he's a former 140-pound champion, several title defenses. And then he had, you know, some people think that he was the champion at 147 as well, but he really just held a silver title. That's around the time he beat Devin Alexander. You know, he retained his silver welterweight title. He had earned it just the fight prior to Devin Alexander, and that one was against Luis Collazo, where he made Collazo look, I hadn't seen anybody really dominate Collazo to that degree. And then he defended that lesser WBC welterweight title, the silver title, again against Chris Algieri, and then he fought Canelo Alvarez, got knocked out at middleweight, went 2 divisions up, and then that was pretty much the end of the ride. He's been 3-1 since, with his 1 loss since that, coming to Terrence Crawford. But as good and as talented as Amir Khan has been, you wonder if you got the full juice from the squeeze. But I feel like we got more of the juice from the squeeze in Amir Khan's career in terms of accolades, accomplishments, meaningful wins than we've gotten in Kell Brook. Even though Kell Brook was a former 147-pound champion that he won off of Sean Porter. He won the IBF belt. This is after Porter beat Devin Alexander for the belt. Porter then knocked out Paulie Malignaggi, was looking super dangerous, crouching low, exploding high. He looked devastating against Malignaggi. But when he defended against Kell Brook came to America and dramatically defeated Sean Porter via majority decision to capture the IBF welterweight belt. He then defended the title 3 times, and then he went up in weight, super ill-advised, went 2 divisions up, like Amir Khan went 2 divisions up against Canelo. Kell Brook did it against Triple G when Triple G was in the middle of his rampage, just destroying one outmatched opponent after another, going on a historic knockout streak of his opponents in defense of his title. Kell Brook dared to be great, and he really paid for it. He broke an orbital bone in that 5th round TKO stoppage. He was looking good in the early rounds, and then in his very next fight, he sweats all the way back down to get back to 147 to defend his IBF belt, the one that he won against Sean Porter, defended 3 times successfully. He defended that against Errol Spence Jr., and he got stopped in the 11th round in a very back and forth, competitive, pretty action-packed fight. That's a very fun fight to go back and rewatch because people forget how quick Kell Brook was, how good of a technical boxer he was. He was giving Errol Spence all he could handle for several rounds. And then in that fight, he actually breaks his other orbital bone. So in those 2 fights, he breaks in some capacity, fractures each side of his face. And I truly believe he hasn't been the same fighter since. Even though he won his next 3 fights, he did those up at 154. Then he came back down and he got stopped by Terrence Crawford in his very last fight, which, although that was, you know, about 1.5 years ago, Amir Khan hasn't been in the ring in close to 3 years. So Amir Khan has almost double the inactivity that Kell Brook has. But yeah, Kell Brook, you feel like he could have been more of a force at welterweight for longer. People have different theories as to why that prime stretch didn't last. I personally chalk it up to those back-to-back fights and stoppages, broken orbital bones against Triple G and Errol Spence Jr. So when I did the initial video, breaking both of the fighters down and kind of saying ultimately that I lean Kell Brook, I'm actually going to change my mind here. I'm going to go Amir Khan via stoppage. And let me tell you why. And I'm not the first person, I'm sure, to come up, with this reason why I'm picking Amir Khan. I just don't trust Kell Brook's durability or his belief in his own durability at this stage. Yes, Amir Khan might be chinny, but I feel like Amir Khan is still willing to walk through more punches and to basically gut it out, fight it out more so than Kell Brook is willing to today. Kell Brook was super resilient. I mean, I thought that for some time that he was the class of the division along with Keith Thurman in that, we'll call it, post-Floyd Mayweather era at 147 welterweight. But, in recent years, recent fights, it's just not the same Kell Brook. And the way that he lost against Terrence Crawford is what first had me apprehensive or a little reluctant to take him over Amir Khan, even though if you were to ask me at any stage of their careers, as they had been smearing each other in the press for several years, if you were to ask me who I think would win, I wouldn't even have to think twice. It would be Kell Brook. He was a stronger fighter. The hand speed was comparable, but I think Amir Khan has ultra great hand speed where he's breaking off 4 to 7 punch combinations, giving the opponent barely anything to counter unless you're willing to punch with them in the way that Danny Garcia was famously willing to do. Amir Khan, for instance, was outboxing Canelo in some of those early rounds. Yes, Canelo's kind of a patient fighter, started tagging Amir Khan to the body before setting Amir Khan up by investing to the body, dropping the shoulders and going high, putting Amir Khan's lights out. But Amir Khan is a beautiful combination puncher. The only thing is, he sticks around the pocket too long sometimes. He'll let his 4 to 5 punches go. Look at his fight against Zab Judah. That was an ultra beautiful performance. And as fast as Zab Judah was, he just couldn't match Amir Khan's. Look, even if Zab Judah per one punch might have a singular punch that might be faster than Amir Khan's, or maybe 1 or 2 punches, Amir Khan just puts them together with 4, 5, 6 punches at a time. And he keeps the volume relatively high. So Amir Khan, I feel, is willing to fight it out and to kind of take a beating. Remember how he gutted it out versus Marcos Maidana back in 2010. Yes, this is about 12 years ago we're talking. But I'm just saying, Amir Khan, he's got heart in a way that I don't think this version of Kell Brook has in the ring. Kell Brook in his prime, again, I think that he was the stronger fighter at 147, and he wasn't chinny. Amir Khan, if anything, that's his Achilles heel, is that sometimes you can put his lights out. But unfortunately for Kell Brook, I think that he will need to put Amir Khan's lights out in order to win this fight. Something tells me that Amir Khan is going to be better able to let his hands go, to take and resist, taking some incoming fire, take some punches, but to keep on coming, letting his hands go. And I just see Kell Brook being the person who's more likely to take a knee. Like, if Amir Khan hits him with, Terrence Crawford didn't look like he hit him with the most devastating power punch, but it was perfectly timed. It was in the right spot, just around that side of the head orbital area. I just feel like Kell Brook, he doesn't have the facial structural resilience to withstand several punches over the course of several rounds. I just don't have a ton of evidence lately from Kell Brook that he's willing to fight, whereas I haven't seen an instance of Amir Khan not fighting. Again, to get rid of Amir Khan, you really have to get rid of Amir Khan. But I feel like Kell Brook has so many unfortunate, unlucky circumstances in the ring. Really, if you look at all 3 of his fights, they're like, 2 of them were those Triple G and Errol Spence ones. Then the one against Terrence Crawford, it's like he got hit by that weird jab hook thing, and then he went stumbling into the ropes, and he really didn't put up any resistance beyond that point. He was done. I just think that there could be a point. It could be the 3rd round, 4th round, any point of the fight. I wouldn't be surprised if in a otherwise competitive fight, I don't know who's going to win the first couple rounds. They're both pretty fast starters. Like, I thought Kell Brook did well against Terrence Crawford in the first 2 rounds. So I don't know who's going to be winning the first 2 to 3 rounds. But I feel like as the punches continue, 4, 5, 6, if Amir Khan starts breaking off combinations to the sides of Kell Brook's eyes, I just don't see Kell Brook at this stage persevering through that. So although in my initial video, I did say that I was leaning Kell Brook, probably via stoppage, I'm actually going to pick Amir Khan here via stoppage. I think that in this fight between ultra talented fighters who are both well past their prime, who both have their own different, separate, glaring flaws, one with the chin, the other, I would say, with the face, and possibly with the desire. I don't know how much spirit to battle that Kell Brook has in his current state. In this battle between these two, I think it's going to come down to, it's cliche to say, but who wants it more? Like, who is willing to walk through fire? And I have seen Kell Brook wilt to the fire more often than I've seen Amir Khan voluntarily basically say, okay, I've had enough, and then start, capitulating and going into the roast. Amir Khan, if nothing else, is the type who will let his hands go and go out on his shield. I just don't know if Kell Brook is willing to go through those deep waters, but I feel confident that Amir Khan will. And I don't think that Kell Brook will necessarily set Amir Khan up in a way where he's going to put his lights out. The first few rounds are going to be very fun. I think that both of these guys, again, fast starters. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of a pace is set in this fight. I just see there being a point where Kell Brook is trying to catch shots like this, but he's not catching them all. Amir Khan has more volume per round, even though, Kell Brook isn't a not busy fighter. Kell Brook has been known to let his hands go too. I just think that, as odd as it sounds, Amir Khan will be the more durable and resilient one in this case. So yeah, this is kind of a late minute switch up here. I usually don't do this, but I'm not going to go Kell Brook via stoppage. I'm going Amir Khan via, we'll say, mid-round stoppage. And it might result in the type of finish that will have people scratching their heads like, I don't know, why did I pay for this? Why did I have a feeling that Kell Brook might disappoint and might not give as spirited an effort as you would think that this long-term rivalry deserves. But we'll see how it shakes out. I definitely can't wait to see how this goes down. Kell Brook for a long time was one of my favorite fighters, and it was really tough to see him go through those back-to-back fights versus Triple G and Errol Spence Jr. And I was of the belief when he went into the Kell Brook fight, into the fight against Terrence Crawford, that Kell Brook had a pretty legitimate shot. Not greater than 50-50, mind you. I would say 65-35. I thought that he was a greater or more competitive, a liver underdog than the betting odds would indicate, than the general boxing consensus seemed to believe. I was sort of bullish on Kell Brook for that Crawford fight. So yeah, you can imagine my disappointment in the way that fight ended. I just don't know whether this is more of a money grab for Kell Brook than it is a willingness or a wanting to fight for several rounds. I haven't seen the same lack of desire from Amir Khan, even though he had his own questionable, we'll say, out versus Terrence Crawford. He got hit with the low blow, and he had everybody saying, "Oh, come on, Amir," like when he basically didn't come back out to continue to fight. I don't know the extent to how bad he was hurting down there, but, I wouldn't begrudge a fighter who truly was damaged to that area, in pain, if he didn't want to continue. It did look like it appeared that he was looking for an out. So that's the closest I've seen to Amir Khan basically saying, I'm out of here. I still think that he has more of a fighting spirit at this juncture than Kell Brook. But yeah, let me know what you think about Amir Khan versus Kell Brook in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.